Good evening, everyone. Tonight I'll be giving a short review of the book I Am Not a Serial Killer by Dan Wells. I'll open with an excerpt from the book. Let's begin. I broke one of my rules today, I said, looking down through the blinds over Dr. Neblin's office window to the street below. Bright cars rolled past in an uneven parade. I could feel Neblin's eyes in the back of my head, studying. "One of your rules?" he asked. His voice was even and steady. He was one of the calmest people I knew, but then again, I spent most of my time with Mom and Margaret and Lauren. His calmness was one of the reasons I came here so willingly. "I have rules," I said, "to keep myself from doing anything wrong." "What kind of things?" "What kind of wrong things?" I asked, "or what kind of rules?" "I'd like to hear about both, but you can start with whatever you want." "Then we better start with the things I'm trying to avoid," I said. "The rules won't make any sense to you if you don't know those." "That's fine," he said, and I turned back to face him. He was a short man, mostly bald on top, and wearing small round glasses with thin black frames. He always carried a pad of paper, and occasionally made notes while we talked. That used to make me nervous, but he offered to let me see his notes anytime I asked. He never wrote things like, "What a freak," or "This kid is insane," just simple notes to help him remember what we talked about. I'm sure he had a "What a freak" book somewhere, but he kept it hidden. And if he didn't have one yet, he was going to make one after this. "I think," I said, watching his face for reaction, "that fate wants me to become a serial killer." He raised an eyebrow, nothing more. I told you he was calm. "Well," he said, "you're obviously fascinated by them. You've read more on the subject than probably anyone in town, including me. Do you want to become a serial killer?" "Of course not," I said. "I specifically want to avoid becoming a serial killer. I just don't know how much chance I have." "So the things you want to avoid doing are, what, killing people?" He peered at me crookedly. A sign I had come to know meant he was joking. He always said something a little sarcastic when we started getting into the really heavy stuff. I think it was his way of coping with anxiety. When I told him about the time I dissected a live gopher, layer by layer, he cracked 3 jokes in a row and almost giggled. "If you've broken a rule that big," he continued, "I am obligated to go to the police, confidentiality or no." I learned the laws about patient confidentiality in one of our very first sessions, when I first talked about starting fires. If he thought that I had committed a crime, or that I was intending to, or if he thought that I was a legitimate danger to anyone, the law required him to tell the right authorities. He was also free under the law to discuss anything I said with my mother, whether he had a good reason or not. The two of them had had plenty of discussions over the summer, and she'd made my life hell because of them. "The things I want to avoid are much lower on the ladder than killing," I said. "Serial killers are usually, virtually always in fact, slaves to their own compulsions. They kill because they have to, and they can't stop themselves. I don't want to get to that point, so I set up rules about smaller things. Like how I like to watch people, but I don't let myself watch one person for too long. If I do, I force myself to ignore that person for a whole week, and not even think about it. So you have rules to stop yourself from small serial killer behaviors," said Neblin, "in order to stay as far away from the big stuff as you can." "Exactly. I think it's interesting," he said, "that you use the word compulsions. That kind of removes the issue of responsibility." "But I'm taking responsibility," I said. "I'm trying to stop it." "You are," he said, "and that's very admirable. But you started this whole conversation by saying that fate wants you to be a serial killer. If you tell yourself that it's your destiny to become a serial killer, then aren't you really just dodging responsibility by passing the blame to fate?" "I say fate," I explained, "because this goes way beyond some simple behavioral quirks. There are some aspects of my life that I can't control, and they can only be explained by fate. Such as, I'm named after a serial killer, I said. John Wayne Gacy killed 33 people in Chicago and buried most of them in the crawl space under his house. Your parents didn't name you after John Wayne Gacy, said Neblin. Believe it or not, I specifically asked your mom about it. You did? I'm smarter than I look, he said. But you need to remember that one coincidental link to a serial killer is not a destiny. My dad's name is Sam, I said. That makes me the son of Sam, a serial killer in New York who said his dog told him to kill. So you have coincidental links to two serial killers, he said. That's a little odd, I admit, but I'm still not seeing a cosmic conspiracy against you. My last name is Cleaver, I said. How many people do you know who are named after two serial killers and a murder weapon? Dr. Neblin shifted in his chair, tapping his pen against his paper. This, I knew, meant that he was trying to think. John, he said after a moment, I'd like to know what kinds of things scare you, specifically. So let's pull back and look at what you said earlier. What are some of your rules? I told you about watching people, I said. That's a big one. I love watching people, but I know that if I watch one person for too long, I'll start to get too interested in them. I'll want to follow them, watch where they go, see who they talk to, and find out what makes them tick. A few years ago, I realized that I was actually stalking a girl at school, literally following her around everywhere. That kind of thing can go too far in a hurry, so I made a rule. If I watch one person for too long, I then ignore them for a whole week. Neblin nodded but didn't interrupt. I was glad he didn't ask me the girl's name because even talking about her like this felt like breaking my rule again. Then I have a rule about animals, I said. Remember what I did to the gopher. Neblin smiled nervously. The gopher certainly doesn't. His nervous jokes were getting lamer. That wasn't the only time, I said. My dad used to set traps in our garden for gophers and moles and stuff, but my job every morning was to go out and check them, bash anything that wasn't dead yet with a shovel. When I was 7, I started to cut them open, to see what they looked like on the inside. After I started studying serial killers, I stopped doing that. Have you heard about the McDonald Triad? 3 traits shared by 95% of serial killers, said Dr. Neblin. Bedwetting, pyromania, and animal cruelty. You do, I admit, have all 3. I discovered that when I was 8, I said. What really got to me was not the fact that animal cruelty could predict violent behavior. It's that, up until I read about it, never thought that it was wrong. I was killing animals and taking them apart, and I had all the emotional reaction of a kid playing with Legos. It's like they weren't real to me. They were just toys to play with. Things. If you didn't feel that it was wrong, asked Dr. Neblin, why did you stop? Because that's when I first realized that I was different from other people, I said. Here was something that I did all the time, and thought nothing of it. And it turns out that the rest of the world thinks it's completely reprehensible. That's when I knew I needed to change, so I started making rules. The first one was, don't mess with animals. Don't kill them. Don't do anything to them, I said. I won't have a pet. I won't pet a dog on the street, and I don't even like to go into a house where someone has an animal. I avoid any situation that might lead me back to doing something I know I shouldn't do. Neblin looked at me for a moment. Any others? He asked. If I ever feel like I'm hurting someone, I said, I give them a compliment. If someone's really bugging me, I say something nice and smile really big. It forces me to think nice thoughts instead of bad ones, and it usually makes them go away. Neblin thought for a moment before speaking. That's why you read so much about serial killers, he said. You don't feel right and wrong the way other people do, so you read about it to find out what you're supposed to avoid. I nodded, and of course it helps that they're pretty cool to read about. He made some notes on his pad. I Am Not a Serial Killer gives us the first-person perspective of John Wayne Cleaver, a 15-year-old boy who is a diagnosed sociopath. He's growing up in a small town in the Midwest. His mother and aunt work in a mortuary, and John assists them in their work of preparing the bodies of the recently deceased. John's different from a typical serial killer. He figured out that he exhibited the classic traits of a serial killer at a young age, and, as of the time of the story, has a set of rules that govern his actions. It has his mom and psychologist to keep him accountable. A series of murders are taking place within his hometown, and John realizes that he can use his own distorted perspective of the world to track down the killer. I won't give a major plot point away, but, similar to the Caretaker of Lorne Field, a supernatural element enters the story, and we're left to question the main character's sanity for much of the book. I'll give a quick disclaimer to those planning to read it. As you can see in the opening of this video, it does get pretty graphic. The book opens with the main character and his aunt preparing a body in the mortuary, and John is often witness to the aftermath of the murders, so expect some visceral descriptions of dead bodies. I'm going to briefly talk about the author now. Dan Wells, in present day, is an accomplished author who has received the Hugo Award and Parsec Award for his podcast, Writing Excuses, where he discusses writing in depth, and he's published very many books. I'm Not a Serial Killer was his first book, published in 2009. Wells did a lot of research into the psychology of serial killers as he prepared to write the character of John Wayne Cleaver, and it shows. John's internal monologues are some of the most compelling parts of the novel. In conclusion, I'd recommend I Am Not a Serial Killer. It's a compelling character study, and if you like true crime, you'll enjoy John's perspective as the plot progresses. Alright, that's it for tonight. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.